The moment I saw my slide deck appear on the main screen, without my name, without my notes, I knew Ethan Drexler wasn't just here to lead. He was here to rewrite history. He stood at the head of the boardroom, sleeves rolled up, voice smooth like a pre-rehearsed keynote. "This predictive model was built by my team over the past few weeks," he said. "My team." The words barely left his lips before I felt the shift in the room. Eyes turned toward him, toward the new boss with the confident grin and a voice full of deliverables. But that model wasn't built over the past few weeks. It had taken me 6 months. 6 months of restructuring legacy data, cleaning up cross-department inconsistencies, re-engineering dashboards that had outlived their use. I had worked weekends, nights, even pulled an all-nighter before the Logix pitch just to finalize the output accuracy. I had presented the preliminary structure in a closed-door meeting 2 months ago. Ethan wasn't even hired then. And yet here we were, my work, his name, and silence from the room. The CEO, Martin Graves, nodded thoughtfully as Ethan continued. "What makes this model scalable isn't just the logic, it's the operational foresight." I watched him gesture toward a heat map I had agonized over, color-coded layers designed to simplify complexity. I tilted my head slightly. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was calibrating. Ethan hadn't just taken credit, he'd taken it confidently because he assumed I wouldn't respond. And for now, he was right. After the meeting, he approached me casually in the corridor, coffee in hand like we were colleagues sharing a harmless joke. "Good flow, right?" he said. "Next time we should tag team the delivery. You've got the logic, I've got the voice." I looked at him, not smiling. "You forgot to mention I also have the data." He laughed. "Well, it's all one team now. No need to keep score." That afternoon, my salary was cut by 20%. Official reason, role realignment. Unofficial reality, Ethan wanted budget flexibility to expand his strategy pod, a euphemism for a vanity team made of ex-colleagues from his last firm, none of whom had touched a predictive model in years. I wasn't even informed directly. I received the revised compensation notice from Lucy, his new executive assistant, who had forwarded it with a 2-line note. "Let me know if you have any questions. Happy to help." I didn't reply. Instead, I reviewed the metadata of the file Ethan had presented. The original version still had my user stamp on every tab. The server logs were untouched. Version history, intact. That night I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 6 months. "Brian," I said quietly, "still leading infrastructure?" He paused. "Yes, budget's a mess though. Drexler's freezing every long-term ops request." "Good," I said, "because I have a workaround, and I need you to leave 3 data audit triggers exactly where they are. No cleanup, no patching." Silence. Then, "Okay, what's going on?" "Just making sure that when the system speaks," I replied, "it says what really happened." I hung up before he could ask more, because this wasn't about protest, it was about precision. And Ethan had just stepped into a structure he didn't understand, with his mouth wide open and his blind spot even wider. By Friday, my access to the strategic resource planner had been downgraded without explanation. No announcement, no internal memo, just a quiet switch from editor to viewer status. While Lucy, who had been with the company for barely 4 weeks, was suddenly listed as platform owner. When I asked her about it in passing, she blinked twice, clearly unaware of what that even meant. "Oh, Ethan just said we were centralizing logins. It's all under one umbrella now," she said, flipping through her tablet like it was a recipe book. "Let me know if you need anything pulled." I didn't answer, because Lucy wasn't the problem. She was the placeholder, the insulation layer. She didn't know she was holding a live wire. The next morning, I pulled the audit logs from our Cloud Mirror archive, an old system we kept for legacy compliance. Still technically active, still accessible, still mine. I found exactly what I expected. Lucy had forwarded 3 versions of my original forecast model to Ethan's private inbox. She had no idea how to redact metadata, no idea that every document she opened left a signature behind. Ethan had added headers, changed formatting, replaced the file title, and re-exported it as a collaborative effort. Then he uploaded it into the company's official repository, timestamped 3:47 a.m. He wanted the spotlight, but he also wanted to erase the shadows behind it. I opened a new notebook, not digital, not trackable, a plain black moleskin. I labeled the first page, distortion timeline. Each entry was simple. Week 1, forecast model stripped of author tags. Week 2, platform permissions rerouted to non-technical staff. Week 2, salary reduction initiated same day as pitch. Below that, I added 2 bullet points with a different pen. Brian, infrastructure hold, confirmed. Next, Jared, Loginix. Because here's what Ethan forgot. The Loginix contract wasn't just a data deal, it was a trust agreement. And the executive sponsor on that contract, Jared Connolly, had once told me over lunch, "Celia, we didn't sign because of dashboards. We signed because you understood the problems before we asked." So I scheduled a casual check-in with Jared. I didn't mention Ethan. I didn't talk about internal shifts. I just asked how implementation was going. He frowned midway through the call. "Actually, that update you promised about the client-side anomaly detection, we haven't seen it yet. I assumed it was still on your end." "It was," I said evenly, "but it seems the delivery chain has changed." "Strange," Jared muttered. "That was the one reason we fast-tracked the renewal." I ended the call with a polite, "Let me know if you need anything else," then closed my laptop and sat still for several seconds. This wasn't just a hostile rebrand of my work. It was a repackaging of value. With my name edited out, my context removed, and my ownership reassigned to someone who didn't even know what questions had led to the solution. But Ethan had made 2 mistakes. First, he assumed everyone would stay quiet because silence was easier than friction. Second, he forgot that value doesn't disappear when it's removed from the deck. It waits. Then it reappears, usually at the moment when the absence becomes impossible to ignore. That evening, as I walked past the glass conference room, I caught sight of Ethan briefing the CEO again. Same tone, same body language, same model. But this time, Martin didn't look impressed. He was staring at something on his screen. His brow furrowed, then he turned the laptop toward Ethan and tapped the corner. Metadata. Someone had sent it to him, not me, which meant someone else had started watching too. I didn't smile. I just kept walking. Because when you plant seeds correctly, you don't chase the harvest. You just make sure the ground is ready when the cracks begin to show. By Monday morning, I had changed the way I walked into the building. No more early starts. No more quiet setups before the floor came alive. I waited. I entered during peak visibility, when elevators were crowded, when chatter spilled from coffee corners, when presence became performance. Because silence is only effective when paired with attention. And Ethan thrived on surface impressions. He needed to believe I had retreated, that I was sulking, slowly disengaging, no longer a threat. So I let him believe it. I submitted reports late, intentionally misaligned by a version number. I asked Lucy to resend permissions she didn't understand. I requested access to files I knew were locked, then followed up publicly on Slack threads where visibility couldn't be scrubbed. She thought I was becoming sloppy. He thought I was becoming irrelevant. But in truth, I was measuring the edges of their illusion. And underneath that performance, I was laying the groundwork. The first call I made was to Nora Bell in procurement, a seasoned operator. Quiet, precise. She owed me nothing, except perhaps the fact that 4 years ago, I had defended her budget variance when finance wanted to suspend her vendor accounts. "Nora," I said plainly, "are Ethan's requests coming through your portal now, or is he bypassing?" She paused, mostly through the assistant. "Lucy uploads PDFs, no standard tags, lots of unlinked codes, but he flagged his items as priority under innovation flow. I'm guessing you didn't create that path?" "No," I replied, "but let it run, and don't clean the audit trail." "Understood," she said. No further questions, no loyalty pledged, just 2 professionals sharing a quiet alignment. Next, Brian in IT infrastructure. We'd already spoken, but now I needed his technical cooperation, not just silence. "Is the dynamic access grid still passive?" I asked. "It is, but I'll need a justification log if I delay a refresh." "Give them a time-stamped delay tag. Performance check in progress. That buys us 72 hours. Long enough to trigger anomalies, but short enough to fall inside policy." He gave a short whistle. "You're not just stepping back, you're isolating variables." "Exactly," I said. "I want to see what happens when the system starts asking for a memory they erased." At the same time, I reached out to Adrian Chow, finance partner and one of the few people who had access to the performance bonus algorithm. He didn't know the technical side of my work, but he respected it. "Have you noticed anything odd in Ethan's self-tagged contributions?" I asked. He chuckled. Besides the fact that half of them started the week he got here, yeah, the model attribution logic is misfiring. But he flagged the anomaly engine under his profile, which doesn't make sense because I know for a fact it came from your pipeline. Leave it, I said. Don't fix the misfire, not yet. Each node I contacted wasn't a friend. They weren't allies. They were custodians. Of functions, of flows, of systems designed not to serve egos, but truth. And when you build systems like that, people don't need to like you to respect what you put in place. All they need is a reason to hold the line. And Ethan had given them one. The final message I sent that week was to Jared at Loginex, not through company channels, just a short encrypted line. Next week, when the data lags, ask who designed the baseline. Ask it out loud. His reply came 2 minutes later, already planned. Because when systems are under pressure, real voices don't scream. They repeat questions until the room goes quiet. The following Tuesday, Ethan walked into the leadership sync 5 minutes late, holding a tablet and a lukewarm latte, clearly expecting applause. The Logenex dashboard is lagging, Martin, our CEO, said without greeting. They flagged it during their prep call, something about anomaly detection missing from baseline projections. Ethan didn't flinch. We had a slight sync delay, he replied smoothly. Data ingestion was restructured for agility. Our new alignment protocols are still stabilizing. I didn't speak because the word agility wasn't just a misdirection, it was a bluff. The baseline model wasn't missing. It had been disconnected, quietly, carefully, by me, from a version-controlled container only 2 people knew existed. One of them was me, the other wasn't Lucy. In that moment, Martin looked toward me, eyebrows low. Not an accusation, just curiosity. I believe the alignment logic Ethan mentioned was based on a restructured version, I said, but I haven't had access to those changes since the realignment. It was the first time I had acknowledged my exclusion aloud, and the shift was immediate. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Lucy looked down at her notes. Martin simply nodded and moved on, but the room had changed, the air tighter, the margin of error thinner. That afternoon, I saw Ethan pacing in the corridor outside procurement. He didn't notice me. He was too busy whispering sharply to Nora, clearly frustrated that a routine requisition had bounced 3 times. He waved a paper in the air, probably a vendor form, before storming off. Nora walked past me a minute later, her face blank, but as we passed, she slid a folded printout into my hand, a screenshot. Ethan's last requisition had skipped 2 required budget checkpoints and tagged itself under Legacy Carryover Executive Discretion. Smart, but not smart enough. That category hadn't been active for 6 years. I smiled, because now the system wasn't just slow, it was contradicting itself, and in contradiction, truth finds daylight. Meanwhile, Lucy had started pinging Brian with IT tickets, access loop, cache purge needed. Why are some of my admin rights timing out? Brian responded exactly as I asked him to, with policy. We can't manually refresh tokens without an authentication chain. Please escalate through platform control. Lucy forwarded the request to Ethan. Ethan ignored it. Instead, he booked a private 1-1 with Martin and labeled it Process Consolidation Proposal. I watched the meeting from my desk. 15 minutes in, Jared from Loginex called Martin directly. His timing was surgical. I just reviewed the projections, Jared said loud enough for half the floor to hear. And I have a question. Who designed the original anomaly thresholds? Martin's face didn't move, but I saw the pause in his fingers as he reached for his keyboard. Ethan tried to respond, but Jared cut him off. Because the person who set those values understood our risk profile better than we did, and I'm not seeing that anymore. Click. Call ended. Ethan didn't speak for several seconds, and in that silence, Martin slowly turned his screen. He didn't say a word either, but on that screen was the same file Jared had mentioned, with the metadata still intact, my name, my timestamp, my version number. That evening, as the floor cleared, I walked past the analytics pod. Ethan sat alone. Lucy hovered nearby, holding her tablet like a shield. He looked up at me, not furious, not panicked, but unsure. Like a man standing on a platform that had begun to shift beneath him but hadn't yet tilted enough to fall. He said nothing, neither did I, because my strategy wasn't to confront, it was to reveal, and the system was just getting started. It started with a calendar invite that didn't go out, One of Ethan's agile impact syncs, those Monday morning rituals where he paraded weekly wins and demanded innovation metrics from people he barely understood. Except this time, the invite never landed. Half the department showed up late. The other half didn't show up at all. Lucy blamed Outlook. Brian didn't respond to her ticket. Because he knew better, the calendar node wasn't broken. It had been reprioritized. Quietly, strategically, by a queue rebalancer we'd installed 2 years ago to prevent server overload during peak loads. A queue that responded not to importance but to credibility scores tied to platform actions. Ethan's profile had dropped below threshold last Friday when he tried to force a manual override on a restricted workflow. No one told him, the system just adjusted. That same day, the Loginix portal timed out mid-presentation. Jared was walking their stakeholders through a custom visual layer, one I had designed with predictive toggles to adapt live, and suddenly, the chart froze. Reloaded, showed blank. Lucy, who was managing technical continuity, offered an apology about latency. "We're still optimizing for live rendering," she said, but there was no latency. The portal was running perfectly. What failed was a trust token, revoked automatically after 3 failed parameter matches by someone without schema permissions, her. The portal didn't crash, it protected itself. Later that afternoon, I heard Ethan pacing near the glass huddle rooms, his voice lower than usual. He was talking to Martin again, this time more subdued. "Working on it. Transition noise. We're reorienting legacy dependencies." Martin's answer was harder to read. "Then maybe you shouldn't have disconnected them before understanding how they were held together." He walked away before Ethan could reply. I didn't see Ethan for the rest of the day. But I didn't need to. His systems were beginning to shake, and they weren't breaking because of sabotage. They were failing from abandonment, from the absence of the one person who used to catch the drift before it turned into a slide. By Thursday, it was no longer isolated. Payroll submitted the wrong compensation batch. Performance review reminders bounced back with misaligned fields. Vendor tickets auto-closed before routing to procurement. The bonus tracking logic flagged a full team overpayment, twice. Each incident minor, each one easy to dismiss, until you stack them and realize the architecture isn't slipping. It's untethered. At lunch, I passed by Lucy again. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were ringed with confusion, no longer the bright assistant floating on Ethan's coattails. She clutched a printed spreadsheet as if holding it tighter might explain why the columns wouldn't align. Behind her, Ethan was in a closed-door call, hands gesturing fast, voice sharper than usual. I didn't stop, but I saw Nora later that evening walking toward the elevators. She caught my eye, just briefly. "No one's approving," she murmured under her breath. "All paths lead nowhere. I've submitted the same request 4 times this week." "Then stop submitting," I said quietly. And she did. Because the unraveling wasn't about explosion, it was about weight, the kind that sinks slowly until no one remembers where the cracks began. By the start of the next week, the first resignation came through. No warning, no transition notes, just a quiet exit from Tara Mendoza, Director of Client Delivery. One of the few who had once asked me, in confidence, if this new boss knew what he was doing. Her message was clinical, citing organizational misalignment, effective immediately. No flowers, no goodbyes. 3 days later, a second resignation followed, then a third, all mid-level leads, all from departments Ethan had restructured without fully understanding. Their departures weren't dramatic, but their absence showed up in backlog reports, in delayed handoffs, in projects that suddenly lacked anyone willing to answer a question without cross-checking 10 systems first. Because trust, once cracked, doesn't scream, it recedes. And with each missing name, Ethan's grip got looser. In a leadership meeting, he tried to pivot. "We're navigating a transitional plateau," he said, gesturing at a pie chart that no longer reflected anything real. "But momentum is building," no one responded. Lucy arrived late again, shuffling half-printed reports with mismatched headers. Martin looked at her, then at Ethan, then back at the chart. But he said nothing, because by now even the CEO had stopped expecting clarity. Across the floor, conversations grew shorter. Messages came with double attachments, redundant screenshots, and polite disclaimers like, "for your awareness," or "per previous confirmation." People weren't collaborating anymore. They were protecting themselves. Brian from infrastructure stopped auto-granting access requests. Nora in procurement locked down purchase paths unless flagged as compliance critical. Even Adrian in finance halted bonus automation pending manual audit. I didn't ask them to. I didn't have to. Because in a system designed for continuity, people don't rebel, they retract. And when enough people retract at once, the system stops flowing. That's not sabotage. That's ecosystem intelligence. Midweek, Jared from Loginix submitted a formal request to reroute client servicing under prior configuration. He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. Martin approved it within the hour. Ethan didn't mention it. But that afternoon, I received a Slack ping from a junior analyst named Priya. She had joined 6 months ago, trained under Tara, and once shadowed me for a reporting cycle. Her message was short. I've been asked to rebuild the risk model. I found your archived logic in the old data sandbox. It still works, just thought you should know. I replied with one sentence, let it speak for itself. Because legacy doesn't need a voice. It needs a moment. And that moment was arriving, one trigger at a time. It began with a file name, not a crisis, not a headline, just one file, an onboarding template that failed to load, then a benefits dashboard that froze halfway through a renewal cycle, then a legal clause, auto-inserted for contractor agreements, missing from the template library. Ethan brushed them off. Teething pains, he told Martin. System migration noise. But there was no migration. There was no noise. There was just the quiet consequence of a system that no longer recognized the hands touching it. Lucy submitted a help ticket to it. It was returned unread. Brian's team had implemented a permissions filter. All executive fast-track requests were paused pending identity verification. Lucy had no signature authority. Ethan did, but his digital ID had expired 2 days earlier, unnoticed. The system hadn't rejected him, it simply forgot him. That morning, Martin tried to approve a bonus batch. The platform returned a soft error. Insufficient clearance, please consult system owner. He forwarded the message to Ethan. No reply. Because Ethan was busy trying to make sense of why the quarterly review sync had vanished from the global calendar, why 3 active dashboards now showed blank grids, and why Loginix had rerouted all communications through Jared directly, bypassing Ethan's team entirely. No one had announced a revolt. There was no mutiny, but the architecture had stopped answering. And when Martin called an emergency meeting to address process continuity issues, the room was filled, but not aligned. Lucy entered late again. Ethan stood, face strained, holding a printout of user logs that meant nothing without context. The systems are intact, he insisted. We just need better visibility. Martin leaned back, then explain this. He slid a screenshot across the table. It was a metadata log. The author field showed my name. The timestamp, 2 quarters ago, before Ethan had ever touched the file. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. Martin looked around the room. Tell me who here knows how that model actually works. Silence. Then Nora, from procurement, spoke, slowly, clearly. I only ever saw one person fix it when it broke. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Everyone else followed. Brian, Adrian, even Priya from the back of the room. No drama, no confrontation, just wait, rebalancing. After the meeting, Ethan called someone from his office. The door was closed, but the tension seeped through the glass. His voice no longer smooth, fractured, defensive. Lucy sat outside, staring at a frozen screen. I walked past them unhurried, because collapse never sounds like what you expect. It doesn't crash, it stalls, it hesitates. It echoes in the pauses between questions no one dares to answer. Because the only person who ever had answers is no longer in the room. And they made sure of that. The final break didn't come with a scandal. It came with an audit. An internal one, requested quietly by the board after a series of operational inconsistencies reached their threshold. It started with compliance. Someone flagged a mismatch between risk documentation and actual approval paths. Then finance noticed a discrepancy between projected bonus allocations and submitted distributions. Procurement chimed in next. Vendor renewals had been executed without proper routing, some of them under deprecated policy codes. Ethan tried to contain it. He scheduled back-to-back meetings with each department head, spinning half answers and buzzwords like iterative pivoting and transitional redundancy. But no one nodded anymore. They listened politely, then logged off without committing to action. Because the collapse wasn't hidden anymore. It was routine. That Friday, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Vanessa Liu, formerly HR in strategy, now on contract with the external audit firm brought in by the board. Her message was brief. Your documentation standards saved 3 departments. The board will see the rest in the full report. I didn't respond, not out of spite, out of purpose. Because the point was never revenge. It was alignment, and the system was finally aligning around the absence it had tried so hard to erase. Lucy disappeared from her desk the following Monday. No announcement, no email, just a login error and a quiet removal from the org chart. Her name vanished from internal Slack channels. Her calendar went blank. People noticed. No one asked. By midweek, a new email hit everyone's inbox. Leadership transition update. Ethan Drexler will be stepping down from his position as head of strategy, effective immediately. Interim leadership will be managed by a cross-functional council while we reassess operational stability. It was unsigned. The subject line was sterile, but the silence that followed was not. People stopped pretending. Requests previously sent for visibility now included my name again. Files once routed through Ethan's flow returned to mine. Priya forwarded me a note. They've asked me to rebuild the dashboard, but this time they told me not to change the author tag. I made no public statement. I didn't take credit, but I did log out of every executive credential permanently. Because my work had never been about access, it had been about integrity. Later that week, I passed Martin in the hallway. He gave me a look, not apologetic, not grateful, just steady. Looks like you were right, he said. I paused. I wasn't trying to be. He nodded once. That's why it worked. And then he walked away. No promises, no offers, just acknowledgement. Exactly the way I preferred it. Because when a system collapses under its own neglect, you don't rebuild by stepping back in. You rebuild by letting those inside finally feel what it's like to carry weight they never saw until it was gone. I never went back. Not even for the so-called transition council Martin assembled. They sent me a request, technically a courtesy, to advise during the stabilization period. No job title, no obligation, just a soft invitation tucked into corporate language. I declined, not because I was bitter, because they weren't asking for me. They were asking for what I had already taken with me. But legacy doesn't live in systems. It lives in understanding. And now they were finally beginning to understand. Jared from Loginics sent me a handwritten note, just one sentence. The silence made more sense than any presentation. I placed it in my drawer, next to the timeline I no longer updated. Instead of re-entering the place that once erased me, I built something else. I joined a smaller firm, one with no slide decks about velocity or disruption. A company where systems were seen as living things, not tools. Where people didn't have to raise their voice to prove their presence. My new title wasn't grand. Director of Structural Continuity. It sounded quiet. It was. But it held everything that mattered. I didn't ask for a team. People came anyway. They brought questions, not to prove themselves, but because they knew I wouldn't answer with noise. I would answer with structure. One afternoon, Priya visited. She had resigned from Orbitech 2 weeks earlier. She didn't ask for a job. She just asked, "How do you know when a system is healthy?" I told her, "When it functions without fear." She stayed, and others followed, analysts, operators, even a few from Martin's original staff. Not because I recruited them, because something followed them, a memory of working in a system that made sense, once. We created a space where experience wasn't trimmed for speed, where older staff weren't treated like legacy overhead, where new hires were taught not just how to do the work, but why the work exists at all. I started a cohort. Professionals over 40, ex-caretakers, ex-consultants, people who had been told they were out of sync with the modern workforce. We didn't talk about bounce rates or dashboards. We talked about resilience, and how often the people carrying the weight were the first ones asked to disappear. There were no cameras, no speeches, no slides, but the room filled every month. Every single time. I never sent a resignation letter, just a final directive in the system. One that terminated my own access after a specific threshold. The threshold was met the day Ethan tried to rewrite the foundation I had built. The access revoked itself. That was enough. Weeks after he left, I received one last forwarded message from Monica, my old infrastructure partner. It was a company-wide announcement from Orbitech's board. Effective immediately, all platform policies developed prior to Q2 are under review. System continuity will be evaluated against original author protocols. Legacy knowledge retention is now classified as critical infrastructure risk. No name attached, just a timestamp. I didn't reply, because even now they still hadn't learned how to speak plainly. But the message said everything. They weren't asking to recover me. They were trying to recover what I represented and what they discarded without ever understanding. That's the thing about legacy. It doesn't live in titles. It's not stored in emails or policy binders. It's not remembered in performance reviews or quarterly charts. Legacy lives in the moment someone reaches for a system and feels it respond correctly, without fear, without friction, because someone once cared enough to build it that way. That's why I never raised my voice. That's why I didn't write exposés or schedule revenge. Because if you've truly done the work, the hard, invisible, load-bearing work, you don't need to take anything down. You just need to step aside. The rest will collapse under its own weight. And when they try to rebuild, they'll realize something even more sobering. That structure is easy. But memory, that's the part you can never recreate.